This manhwa is about the mercenary king. Once feared across the continent, he sought vengeance for his fallen family. But in the heat of war, an unexpected foe struck him down, only to awaken in the past, in the days before his family's fall. Now, with a second chance, he will change everything. This time, there's no room for mistakes. The story begins with a brutally wounded knight talking to himself. He mutters that he knows the name very well, the name of an uncontrollable guy, a man out of his mind. Ghislain Perdium, the useless son of Count Perdium and the one who defeated the best knight of the north. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears and mockingly asks the wounded knight if he found the trap warm and cozy. The knight curses and demands to know if the figure was aware of the plan beforehand. The mysterious figure replies that he knew everything. The number of people involved, the spies, and even the reinforcements. He knew it all from the start. The wounded knight curses again, insisting he was a hidden ace, and there was no way he could have been outmaneuvered. Before he can say more, the mysterious figure kicks him in the face, removing his mask. He reveals himself as Ghislain Perdium, boasting that he will win every war because he has all the plans. Now, we flash back to a year ago. The scene shifts to the camps of Luthania Kingdom, near the Perdium estate. Our main character, Ghislain, wakes up confused, wondering how he's alive. Just moments ago, he was in battle. A flashback shows two knights fighting. One's sword flies out, and the other slashes him across the chest. The victorious knight declares, "This is how it ends, Ghislain Perdium, the mercenary king, one of the 7 strongest men." Ghislain was defeated by Aiden, one of the top 7 noble knights. Aiden asks Ghislain for his last words, but Ghislain, ashamed for failing to complete his revenge, curses him instead. Aiden taunts him, calling him arrogant, and says he didn't expect Ghislain to be the oldest son of the fallen Perdium household. He questions if Ghislain left the family after his sister's death. Ghislain asks how Aiden knows about that, given he's from a different kingdom. Aiden smirks, revealing that he worked hard to track Ghislain down, and that they were the ones who conspired with the Delphine household to bring down Perdium. Ghislain realizes there were others who wanted to destroy his family. Aiden says there's no point in explaining further, it's fate. Ghislain yells that he will never forgive him, but his throat is swiftly slit. Back in the present, Ghislain looks at himself in disbelief, wondering how he's still alive, and notices that he's in his younger body. Scanning his surroundings, he wonders if he's been taken by a mage for experimentation. Suddenly, a voice calls him young master. It's Ricardo, a Perdium soldier, who urges Ghislain to come out, as he knows he's awake. Ghislain, still in shock, draws his sword and holds it to Ricardo's neck, demanding answers. Ricardo, unfazed, pushes Ghislain back and scolds him for throwing a tantrum earlier. Ghislain, confused, asks what he's talking about. Ricardo explains that Ghislain had thrown a fit, demanding to lead the troops to raid the orcs. Ghislain insists this is nonsense, but Ricardo brushes him off, reminding him that people are waiting. When Ghislain asks where they are going, Ricardo responds, to the Perdium estate, of course. Ghislain grabs him by the shoulder, shouting in disbelief. He asks if it's truly the Perdium estate, the fallen Perdium estate. The scene shifts, and Ghislain sees the estate, untouched and standing strong. He's shocked, remembering how it had been reduced to ashes. Ricardo, sensing his confusion, teasingly asks if he had a nightmare about his own household falling. Ghislain pinches himself, trying to confirm whether he's dreaming. Ghislain realizes his body is young again and the estate is still intact. He has traveled back in time. He recalls his younger self, who had resented the household due to feelings of inferiority. His tantrums had driven people away, and in frustration he had run away. Years later, he became a mercenary and returned to the estate, seeking redemption, only to find it destroyed. He lost everything. But now, everything is still here, all the people he once cherished. Ghislain laughs from sheer joy but reminds himself it's not the time for celebration. He remembers that today was the day they raided the orcs. In his previous life, this raid was a disaster. The squad was almost entirely wiped out because of his stubbornness to prove himself as a commander. Suddenly, a hut flies through the air. The orcs are already here. Ghislain wonders if this was how it happened in his previous life. The soldiers engage the orcs, but they are overwhelmed. The raid squad commander, Scoven, shouts for everyone to hold formation and not panic. Scoven, fighting with all his might, thinks they were ambushed and outnumbered. A soldier screams, warning Scoven of an orc attacking him from behind. Just then, Ghislain arrives, grabs Scoven's shoulder, and shoves him aside. The other soldiers watch in shock as Ghislain effortlessly cuts off the orc's arm and kills it. Though he cannot use mana, Ghislain swings his sword with precision and skill. He turns to the commander and demands something, but Scoven is too stunned to understand. Ghislain once again demands commanding rights. Frustrated, he thinks to himself, asking for this when soldiers' lives are on the line? He then responds, I can't give you those rights no matter how much you ask. Moving away, he mutters to himself, is this a game? He reflects that the commander couldn't give him the rights that Count Perdium had given him. At that moment, an orc charges forward, and the commander steps in front of Ghislain, ordering the soldiers to fall back. He then tells Ghislain that he's too inexperienced to command. Ghislain realizes he has no choice, so he throws his sword. It barely misses the commander, who grabs Ghislain by the collar and demands to know what he was doing. To his shock, the commander then sees an orc with a sword in its forehead, dead right before him. Ghislain asks, what is the most important thing in battle? And continues, there's no hope of victory if our people are in fear. With a smile, Ghislain declares, we need to gain momentum. He grabs the sword, jumps into the fray, and kills an orc with a strike to the head. The others watch in stunned silence as he yells, I will kill them all, and begins to swiftly kill one orc after another. The commander watches in disbelief, thinking, is this a dream? Even as a mana user, it's difficult for him to do what Ghislain is doing. He sees that Ghislain, though exhausted, is using small, precise movements to dodge attacks and striking at the orc's weak spots like a mana-less swordmaster. Terrified, the commander realizes Ghislain is even greater than that. Ghislain's battle cries draw the attention of more orcs, who begin to follow him. The soldiers are confused, asking the commander what Ghislain is trying to do. Attacking and gaining attention was a good strategy, but now Ghislain is leading the orcs toward a cliff. The commander suddenly understands and orders everyone to raise their shields and follow the young master. We see Ghislain running, then, seeing the commander and troops closing in behind the orcs, Ghislain leaps off the cliff and yells, now! The commander shouts the order for the troops to push the orcs off the cliff, and they follow Ghislain's lead. All the orcs fall to their deaths. Everyone cheers, thinking they've won. But the commander, looking down at the cliff, calls out for Ghislain. To his shock, he sees Ghislain clinging to his sword, which is stuck in the rocks. The commander reaches down to offer his hand, but Ghislain loses his grip and slips, falling down the cliff. The soldiers cry out for the young master. The scene shifts to Ghislain in a dream, hearing a familiar voice calling him, Ghislain Appa. In the dream, memories of his sister Elena flood back. She grabs him and says, let's go together. Then, he wakes up, relieved to be alive. He realizes they managed to save him, but the pain from pushing his body to the limit is overwhelming. He's glad to be alive, though. A maid enters the room, smiling as she sees Ghislain awake. He recognizes her as Belinda, his personal tutor and the only one who stayed by his side after the fall of his family. She sets a basket on the table and expresses how worried she was, saying he should have let the soldiers handle the orcs. Ghislain, overcome with emotion, suddenly hugs her. Belinda, surprised, asks if she's done something wrong. He simply says, I'm just glad to see you. Belinda asks why he's so happy, saying they see each other every day. Ghislain thinks he needs to tell her the truth and tells her, a catastrophe is coming soon. She asks what he means and Ghislain explains, I've come back from the past. Belinda is shocked, asking if he means that the Perdium family is in danger. Ghislain replies it's not that, but before he can say more, Belinda starts to yell at him, asking what he plans to do if he's too hurt to attend the festival. Ghislain, confused, asks about the festival. She reminds him that Lady Elena has been waiting for him to go with her. Ghislain recalls that there was always a festival around this time of year, but in his past life, he never went due to the traumatic events. He asks Belinda when the festival is. She replies, next week. Ghislain thinks to himself, that day changed my life. Just then, someone enters the room and calls out for Ghislain. Appa? Ghislain remembers. Elena will die in a week. He turns to see Elena standing at the door. Ghislain hugs her immediately, and she asks, what kind of prank is this? He says that he misses her. As she pulls back, she says, You're creeping me out. Ghislain, grabbing his chest, thinks, what was that strength? Was she always this strong? She says, Belinda asked me to come. Doing this won't make anything okay. Okay, he asks. She tells him, you said for me to piss off, that I'm annoying, and that even my breath feels disgusting. He says, did I say that? And thinks that in his past life he wasn't close to Elena, and he was a complete piece of shit. He says sorry, and both of them are shocked to hear him apologize. Elena, surprised, says, you got beaten by the orcs. Did your head get hurt? He says, I beat them all. Why do people say I got hit? Suddenly, he feels a lot of pain, and she mocks him, saying, you did all that without strength and came back unconscious. Both of them start smiling, looking at him, and he thinks everyone is the same as I remember them. Why did I waste so much time on useless things in the past? He recalls rejecting Elena's offer to go to the festival with her, the last time he saw her, and her body was later found shredded. He regretted not being with her then. Two of Elena's bodyguards, Jamal and Philip, enter. Elena asks them if something happened, as she had asked them to wait outside. Jamal apologizes, saying the servant asked her to oversee their work on the festival. Ghislain, confused, asks, why do they ask Elena? Belinda, from behind, taunts Ghislain, you're always lazing around. And there's a shortage of workers in Perdium, so the young lady has to work. As Elena heads out, Ghislain thinks, are they really short on workers? I never paid attention to these things in the past, so I don't know. Then he says to Elena, I'll help. Both Elena and Belinda are shocked, and Elena mocks him. Did you get hit in the head? The scene shifts to the festival area, where people look scared. Elena asks Ghislain to go away because people are frightened by him. While she pushes him, he thinks, Elena's body was found near the slums. Someone must have called her there. To prevent that, I need to know the ins and outs of the castle. A knight calls Ghislain from behind, referring to him as Lord. Ghislain recognizes him as Old Man Fergus. The knight, holding Ghislain, cries and says he rushed here as soon as he heard about the orcs. Elena comes over and asks Fergus to take Ghislain to his room because he's acting weird. Fergus agrees, and Ghislain thinks my hooligan image is getting in my way again. He will get to know what's going on in the castle in the following week. Then Ghislain asks the old man to take him to the abandoned training field. The old man asks why, and Ghislain says, to train. The old man is shocked but takes him to the field. Ghislain is surprised by how perfect it is for training. He never saw anything like this as a mercenary. The old man says, I kept it clean in case you wish to use it. Ghislain wonders, in my past life, did he also do this? He pats the old man on the shoulder and says, dying really feels like shit. The old man replies, you're acting as if you've already experienced life and death. Ghislain smiles and says, yes, I'm reincarnated. The old man scoffs and tells him to stop fooling around. Ghislain tells him to leave so he can train, and the old man follows. Ghislain reflects on how he always treated everyone like an enemy and was short-sighted. He believes the one behind Elena's death was a lord from a neighboring territory, which led to Perdium's destruction. Elena's death was the beginning of the house's downfall, and he's determined to set things straight. Ghislain knows he needs to improve his physique, but time is short. He recalls that he could control mana, a supernatural resource that allows humans to break their limits. For most people, noticing mana is difficult, but for him, it was second nature in chaotic battlefields. He starts collecting mana, and with his experience, it's a piece of cake. Using a method from a half-burned book, he creates 3 mana cores and connects them, feeling a lot of pain. This is his body's limit now, but in his past life, he could create 5. This method allows him to generate explosive mana quickly but consumes a lot of it, which is why he lost to Aiden in his past life when his mana ran out. He thinks, if it was a fair fight, I would have won. But now I have time, and I'll kill Aiden and the bastard behind Delphine House. I'll destroy them all. 1 week passes. Ready for the festival, his sister is shocked and says, you really came this time. You usually don't like these things. I'm a Perdium. I have to come. She replies, you've been acting odd lately. Like training for a week. What's wrong with that? Next in line for a night family, training hard. She taunts him, you used to say dad was annoying, and now you already want to be lord? She smiles and says she likes how things are going now. Ghislain thinks my actions are changing the future slowly. The general flow is the same, but it's hard to gauge the impact of small events. I need to respond to each situation effectively. He goes with his sister to enjoy the festival. As they sit and talk, Ghislain thinks nothing has happened. Is that because Elena is with me? Then suddenly, Elena's escort knights come and ask her to go to the new event taking place. She happily starts to go with them. Then we see Elena's escort knights, Jamal and Philip. They were the most trusted knights in the feud because they had protected Elena since her childhood. Ghislain watches them and thinks these two were the traitors. As they arrive, one of the knights says, "We're here." Elena asks, "There's nothing here. Are you too sure there will be a performance in such a place?" The knight responds, "Yeah, they'll be here soon." While Elena and the knights are having their conversation, Ghislain scans the surroundings. It looks like a simple deserted street, but the roads are blocked, and it seems like a properly prepared place for a killing and kidnapping. Elena grabs Ghislain's hand and says, "Let's go, big bro. I don't want to wait any longer for the performance." She wants to leave, but the knights try to stop her, convincing her to stay. Soon after, a man named Frank arrives with his guards. Frank says, "As expected, your work process is clean. You brought her here." The knight replies, "Yeah, we've brought the young lady. Let's end the deal here." Frank, confused, asks, "Isn't that the eldest son of Peridium? I didn't request for him." The knight explains, "He foolishly followed us, not knowing this would be his graveyard. You can take him for free." Ghislain looks at Jamal and says, "You sold us out, and you think you'll get away with this?" Without hesitation, Ghislain draws his sword and cuts Jamal in half. Philip, shocked, thinks, how could a knight lose to an amateur like Ghislain? He grabs Elena, using her as a shield, but Ghislain swiftly throws his sword, piercing Philip's head. The guards with Frank, witnessing this, whisper, "Are you sure he's the eldest son of Peridium?" Frank, observing, thinks, judging by his appearance, he doesn't seem like a professional, even though he killed them both instantly. Meanwhile, Elena asks, "What's happening, big bro?" Ghislain doesn't want her to see the carnage, so he strikes her neck, making her unconscious. As she falls asleep, Ghislain gently places her down. Frank, amused, thanks Ghislain for killing the two knights, as he was planning to get rid of them anyway. He adds, "I thought you were different. Have you been hiding your skills all along?" Ghislain draws his sword again and replies, "What does it matter to you?" Frank then orders his guards, capture him and break every limb of his body. The guards attack. Ghislain throws a firecracker at one of them, using a technique called shallow trick. Another guard attacks from the right, but Ghislain blocks the sword with his elbow, grabs it, and decapitates the guard. While this happens, Frank tries to attack Ghislain from behind, but Ghislain senses it and blocks the strike with his sword. Asks, "How did you block that?" Ghislain retaliates, aiming for Frank's neck, but the blow doesn't fully sever his head. Frank, stunned, thinks, "If I hadn't reinforced my neck with mana, I would have been beheaded." Ghislain wonders, how did he survive that? He must have focused his mana to reduce the damage. Frank, recovering, says, "I have no clue how you learned such strange swordsmanship at your age. But now you shall die here." Frank attacks Ghislain with a strike aimed at his head, but Ghislain, smiling, easily dodges the attack and counters with a powerful blow, sending Frank flying backward. Frank, trying to stay composed, mutters, "This attack won't work with this level of mana." But suddenly he starts coughing, blood spilling from his mouth. Shocked, he thinks, how did this happen? There's no way he pierced through my enhancement. Ghislain approaches and says, "Prepare yourself now." As he speaks, Ghislain's third core is unleashed, a purple aura surrounding him. Frank, visibly stunned, exclaims, "How did you boost your mana so greatly?" Ghislain leaps at him with both swords, delivering an attack that Frank barely blocks. The force of the block leaves Frank's hands numb. "I've never heard of a method this explosive," Frank thinks, as Ghislain strikes again, shattering Frank's sword into pieces and driving his blade into Frank's body, puncturing his core. Ghislain, pressing his sword deeper, asks, "Who's the one who requested this?" Struggling, Frank pulls out a small blade and snarls, "I'm not going to die this easily. I'll take young Lady Peridium with me." But Ghislain swiftly throws a blade and warns, "Don't try anything. Now answer my question. I'll remove my sword, and I'm sure someone like you can manage to patch up the wound." As Ghislain prepares to destroy Frank's mana core, Frank yells, "Are you crazy? If the mana falls, it could cause a massive explosion." Ghislain replies calmly, "I can manage it." In deep pain, Frank finally confesses, it was Count Desmond. He's the one who requested this. He said he needed a pretext to start a war against Peridium and degrade the families. So it was Desmond, Ghislaine thinks, piecing the plot together. He readies his sword to kill Frank, who begs, "What are you doing? This isn't what we agreed on." Ghislaine coldly responds, "What does it matter now? You've killed many in your time, and now you're scared when it's your turn." Without hesitation, Ghislaine kills Frank. Afterward, Ghislaine starts coughing, realizing he's been hurt. He glances at Elena and heads into a nearby room. In his previous life, this was the place where they found a body next to Elena. According to Ghislaine, it was the son of the Degrade family, killed to frame him as Elena's murderer. Once this was revealed, it sparked the war. Determined to change fate, Ghislaine burns the place down, destroying the evidence, and takes Elena with him. As they leave, we see a shadowy figure watching them from a tree, who then disappears into the night. Then, we see the person standing on the tree earlier now inside a room, addressing a group of people seated at a round table. The person reports it was a failure. "We sent guards and knights with Frank, but..." Before he can finish, the people begin to scold him, saying, "You couldn't even handle one girl? Ghislaine Peridium is the problem." Another scoffs, "That useless bastard from the north? Are you really using him as an excuse?" They begin discussing Ghislaine and decide he should be eliminated, blaming him for the failure. Suddenly, a voice from the corner of the room interrupts. So much noise. The speaker, an authoritative figure, asks the man in the robe, "Do you want one more chance?" The robed figure nods, replying, "I will get rid of Ghislaine." "How?" asks the person from the chair. "I have someone in mind," the robed figure says. When the others demand to know who, he replies, "His name is Cain. He's famous for his strength and swordsmanship despite his young age. He's the epitome of power. Plus, he's Ghislaine's cousin. It won't be forced for them to meet." The person on the chair warns, "If you fail again, there will be no next time." A few days pass, and the festival is paused due to the scandal involving Frank and the guards trying to traffic Lady Elena. The scene shifts to the training hall at Peridium Castle, where Ghislaine is practicing. A man named Fergus approaches, observing Ghislaine's technique. He thinks, "I've trained my mana for a long time, but I've never seen anything like this." Ghislaine, noticing him, asks, "Did you need something from me, Fergus?" Fergus replies, "I just wanted to stop by and thank you for protecting the young lady." Ghislaine humbly responds, "You're thanking me? It was something I should have done. Now let's go eat." Later, we see Ghislaine and Elena sitting at a table, talking about the night of the incident. Elena says, "No one believes me when I say it was you who saved me." Ghislaine smiles and says, "Let it be. They won't believe us anyway." In his thoughts, Ghislaine reflects, "I was able to stop the war from happening, but they won't give up that easily. I need to strengthen our military force." Just as their meal arrives, they hear protests coming from outside the castle. People are demanding compensation for the festival's cancellation. Ghislaine asks what's going on, and a maid named Belinda explains, "Our country is full of merchants who make their living from festival profits. Last year was good, but this year, with the festival cancelled, they're angry." Ghislaine thinks, is the country's situation so bad that this could spiral out of control if nothing is done? He tells Fergus, "Send soldiers to calm them down." Fergus replies, "We don't have any soldiers left. Most have been dispatched to the Forest of Monsters for reconstruction after the orc raid." Ghislaine, frustrated, thinks, "No money, no soldiers." He grabs Belinda and says, "Let's talk. You manage the money. Can't we use some to calm the merchants?" She shakes her head and replies, "There isn't any." "Why not?" Ghislaine asks. She gives him a pointed look and says, "Because you spent money like water. Your allowance has been cut off." Ghislaine sighs in frustration, "Lend me some money." Then, "I don't have any," Belinda says firmly. Deep in thought, Ghislaine sits by the window, pondering how to resolve the situation. Suddenly, Ricardo comes running in, panicking. "Young master, there's a problem." Ghislaine turns to him, asking, "What happened?" Ricardo, out of breath, says, "Young Master Cain wants to see you." The scene shifts, and we see Cain brutally beating a guard. Ghislaine arrives and says, "There you are, Cain." Ghislaine approaches Cain, who is still beating his escort knight, and asks Ricardo, "What happened here?" Ricardo explains, We heard about a disturbance and found Cain attacking his escort knight. Cain turns to Ghislain and says, "Rumors about you were true, so Commander Scoven." The knight explained them to me and I gave him a wake-up call to knock some sense into him. Cain scoffs. He claimed that you, someone who never trains, took down an orc with your bare hands and dealt with traitors. That's why I had to correct him. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't lied in the first place. Ghislain, while maintaining his composure, reflects on Cain from his past life. Cain always treated me like a subordinate, causing chaos in Peridium whenever he visited. No one ever dared to confront him because I was his subordinate. Cain, observing Ghislain's calmness, thinks usually he would have charged at me by now with this much provocation. The scene then flashes back to a moment when Cain met with the robed man. The robed man had asked Cain to kill Ghislain, promising that if he succeeded, the esteemed one would support the Logius family. Cain had been hesitant at first, saying, "Ghislain is also an heir to his land. How am I supposed to eliminate him?" The robed man had reassured him, "You can provoke him into a duel and accidentally kill him. I'll accompany you as your escort knight." Cain had agreed, saying, "I have to kill my own cousin? Fine, let's go right away." Returning to the present, Cain smirks at Ghislain and says, "Why are you so quiet? Since I'm here, why not bring out the thing you prepared for me?" Ghislain, puzzled, asks, "What are you talking about?" Cain grins. "Let's liven up the moment since the festival's been interrupted. We've always been in sync when it comes to these things." Ghislain recalls his past life, thinking he's talking about alcohol and women. "Cain used to waste my money on his indulgences, and now I have no money because of it. But wait, he owes me. Cain is now my source of money." Ghislain decides to use this moment to his advantage and asks Cain, "When do you plan to repay your debt?" Cain, taken aback, replies, "Debt? What debt?" Ghislain grins, "You remember all those times I covered for you? Alcohol, women. It was all on my dime. According to my calculations, you owe me 1,000 gold, with interest." Cain laughs dismissively. "That should have cost 100 gold at most. And besides, weren't you doing it out of friendship?" "Friendship? I've been your doormat for the longest time. Now, pay me back, or I'll beat the crap out of you." Cain, angered by the challenge, stands up and says, "I've been too soft on you. Now, you need to get yourself together." Cain throws a punch, but Ghislain dodges it, surprising everyone. Cain, enraged, throws another punch, but Ghislain dodges again and counters with a sharp uppercut. Cain falls to the ground, feigning hurt to set up the perfect scenario for a duel. Cain takes off his glove and, with a smirk, tosses it to the ground, challenging Ghislain to a duel. But before Cain can fully execute his move, Ghislain grabs his own glove and throws it in Cain's face, saying loudly, "You insulted me, the heir of Peridium, in front of my people. You assaulted my knight's dignity and the nobility itself." Cain, caught off guard but grinning, says, "I knew you were a fool. Fine, I accept your duel. Don't regret it if you die." Ghislain, now calm and calculating, turns to Ricardo and says, "Bring all the merchants in front of the castle. Tell them I'm about to make them a lot of money." The arena fills with people, eagerly awaiting the duel between Ghislain and Cain. Merchants are buzzing with excitement, placing bets left and right. As everyone sees Cain, the strong and aggressive opponent, they bet heavily on him. No one bets on Ghislain, assuming he stands no chance. Cain, noticing the crowd's behavior, smirks and says, "How dare you turn this duel into a marketplace? Let me make one thing clear. My sword won't stop, even if you surrender." Ghislain remains calm and replies, "Since enough people have gathered, let's get started." The robed man, observing the scene, mutters, "This bet won't be fair unless someone is foolish enough to bet on Ghislain." At that moment, Commander Scoven steps forward, placing a bet on Ghislain, followed by Elena, who confidently bets on her brother. The crowd murmurs in surprise as the fight begins. Ghislain stands still, staring down Cain. "You know I'm older than you," he taunts. "Make the first move." Cain, already riled up, lunges forward and swings his sword. Ghislain effortlessly blocks the strike, and when Cain swings again, Ghislain dodges. The crowd gasps in disbelief. Cain swings wildly, but Ghislain continues to dodge, his movements calm and controlled. Cain shouts, "You were always running away. Even in the old days." He lands a heavy blow that sends Ghislain flying through the air. The robed man grins, thinking, it's over for Ghislain. But to everyone's shock, Ghislain lands gracefully, as if the attack barely affected him. He stands firm, his posture unwavering. I wanted to take it slow, Ghislain says coolly, but you've crossed the line. Now it's over for you. Cain charges again, striking repeatedly, but Ghislain dodges every attack with ease. Then, Ghislain counterattacks with precision, striking Cain over and over, making him bleed. Each hit is calculated, knocking the strength out of Cain. Finally, Ghislain disarms Cain, sending his sword flying across the arena. The crowd gasps in amazement, murmuring, is Duke Ghislain really going to win? Cain, disoriented and bleeding, thinks to himself, how could this punk show such a high level of swordsmanship? Ghislain steps back and lowers his sword, a confident smile on his face. I will be fighting barehanded from now on, he declares. I thought I could use this as a chance to educate you, but now, I'll fight with my bare knuckles. Cain, shocked and humiliated, stands unarmed, facing the now unarmed but undeniably stronger Ghislain. The crowd watches in stunned silence as the duel reaches its unexpected turn. The crowd is stunned when Ghislain declares a bare-knuckle fight, knowing that Cain excels in this form of combat. Despite the surprise, Ghislain confidently raises the stakes, betting an additional 2,000 gold on himself. The audience, thinking Ghislain is setting himself up for failure, rushes to place even more bets on Cain. As the fight resumes, Cain smirks, saying, sure, fight bare-knuckled if you want, but I'll still use my sword. Elena, worried, shouts, big bro, use your sword. Cain charges at Ghislain with his blade, but Ghislain easily dodges, landing a brutal punch to Cain's ribs and then his jaw. The crowd is shocked, and whispers spread that Ghislain might actually win. Cain, clearly rattled, mutters while attacking, I have to kill you to secure the future of our Loge's family. But Ghislain, with precise and powerful blows, beats Cain senseless, leaving him bruised and bloodied. Although Ghislain could end Cain's life, he chooses mercy, remembering how Cain's father once helped the Paradigm family when they were at their lowest point 5 years ago. Instead of finishing Cain, Ghislain offers his hand and says, get up, you've been taught enough. Cain, though furious, accepts his defeat and takes Ghislain's hand. The robed man who was backing Cain yells angrily, you weak brat, how could you accept defeat? I trusted you. Cain, exhausted and humiliated, says, let's go, I'm done here. But Ghislain isn't finished. He turns to the crowd and raises his voice. Everyone falls silent as Ghislain points to the robed man. This man here has graciously volunteered to pay for all the meat and drinks for everyone gathered here. The robed man is visibly shocked and stammers, I didn't agree to this. Withdraw your statement. Ghislain smirks and replies, this is the price for losing the duel. And don't forget to add the 2,000 gold from the bet. If you don't, well, you know what will happen. Cornered. The robed man reluctantly agrees. Understood. The next day, Ghislain is sitting with the gold he's earned, deep in thought about what to do with all the money. He begins to contemplate hiring mercenaries to expand his forces, starting a business to grow his wealth further, and ensuring the strength of his army. His sister Elena arrives and asks curiously, what are you going to do with all this money? Ghislain, with a teasing smile, replies, why? Do you want some? Belinda, standing nearby, interjects, we already know where you're going to spend it. Lady Amelia's birthday is soon, and you're putting on this grand show just to buy her an expensive present, aren't you? Elena laughs. So, you did all that just to impress your fiancé? Ghislain, completely caught off guard, is shocked. Fiancé? He thinks to himself, I have a fiancé. Comment down below for part 2, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.